From the campus of the University of Nebraska at Omaha. Consider This, a program of issues and information behind today's news.
We are coming on the air because the war in Ukraine has begun. Just minutes after Russian President Vladimir Putin announced a special military operation in eastern Ukraine, explosions were heard in Kyiv, and that is where Charlie D'Agata is tonight. And Charlie, tell us what you're hearing and seeing.
Well, you know, Nora, we've been following this for so many days and weeks, and the tensions have been building up, and we've all been expecting, you know, something major to happen, an invasion, possibly airstrikes. We thought it might be happening in the east, and we know the fighting has been taking place in the east, but we also know that there are targets, legitimate, well, the Russians would consider legitimate targets here in Ukraine itself.
I'm Kathy Wyatt. Welcome to the 25th season and this week's edition of Consider This. Our topic, the Ukraine invasion. We have two guests joining us to talk about it. Jody Nethery Castro, Associate Professor of Political Science at UNO, is here in the studio. And on Zoom from Washington, D.C., we have Christopher Yah. Dr. Yah is the Associate Executive Director for Strategic Deterrence and Nuclear Programs at the National Strategic Research Institute at the University of Nebraska, U.S. Strategic Command's university-affiliated research center. Thank you both and welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Jody, I want to begin this conversation with you and just what happened on February 24th.
Yeah, I think the clip that you showed called it a military operation that launched by Russia in the Ukraine. In some ways, it really felt like almost a slow walk to conflict. Of course, now that it's been nearly a week now, it doesn't feel quite like a slow walk anymore. But we had a lot of telegraphing of what might happen by our intelligence, U.S. intelligence, and by the president himself, explaining that that Russia had plans to attack Ukraine, and so it wasn't completely a surprise when it happened on February 24th, but it was the culmination of really the end of diplomacy. That was a lot of diplomatic efforts trying to avert this very thing.
Loaded question, but what was the reason? I mean, people are asking, and it's not as simple, I think, as we'd like to believe, right?
Right. I think, in some ways, the prospect of a hot war, a land war in Europe has been, the specter and the fear. But why did it happen? Well, in a nutshell, I think that President Putin felt that he probably had opportunity and felt that he wanted to increase the security that Russia would feel with a buffer between the West and particularly between NATO countries. So a lot of actions that have happened since the end of the Cold War have felt threatening and even provocative to Russia. And so this was really, I think, the culmination of trying to push back on that from his perspective.
Yeah, I think if we go back in history, I mean, there's always been conflict. You can go back 100 years to the time of Stalin, right? Mm-hmm. And the famine of 1932. Talk a little bit about that.
Right. Well, that was, I think it's actually an interesting illustration because even at that time, Ukraine was asserting its own identity in really resisting the forced collectivization of farming during the Stalin era, and for Ukraine, they felt that this was an affront to their own kind of autonomy, and even within the Soviet Union, and so they resisted this. They were punished by the Soviet Union, and their food was taken away. I mean, there was a starvation, and you mentioned it. I mean, there were, I think, 4 million people maybe estimated to have died during just that 2-year period.
Wow. Okay, now we fast forward a little bit, post World War II, right? NATO is founded. Now, I think in broad strokes, most people know what that is, but talk to us about what's important to know about NATO. And as you do that, we're going to put the members up for people on the screen.
Sure. So NATO is the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. It's a collective security organization that was really designed to bind the United States with our allies in Europe, with a couple of goals, or really three goals. One was to deter the Soviet Union, to be a bulwark against, Soviet designs on Europe. Secondly, it was really also, and sometimes talked about in a lesser way, meant to also prevent against sort of militant nationalism taking hold again in Europe, as happened in World War II. So, kind of preventing that, and also really to promote the the working together, the union, if you will, of and creating that sense of unity for Europeans.
So Soviet Union collapses, Eastern European countries become independent again, but there's still conflict, right? Talk about that a little bit.
Well, with the end, I mean, as much as people don't think of it as a positive era, the Cold War, there was some stability in that, because you sort of had two well-defined sides, and you had two superpowers, if you will, in the Soviet Union and the United States. With the end of the Soviet Union, there was some disarray, and it wasn't, the countries weren't all evenly ready to sort of have their own sovereignty and be on their own. I mean, it's always messy when you're trying to promote democratization. And it's taken hold in some places better than others. But and there was more of a sense of independence and sovereignty on the part of some countries than others. And so, Russia has, and Putin has been pretty open about, romanticizing the Soviet Union and regretting the end of the Soviet Union, because it meant Russia was, Russia had influence and power bigger than itself. So the opening up of and the autonomy of all these countries meant, where are they going to fall in this kind of alignment with the Soviet Union and its Cold War influence in Eastern Europe? It had a buffer from the West. It had a sphere of influence, and Putin has spoken openly about the desire to maintain and even grow the current sphere of influence of Russian power. So Ukraine is kind of a key piece in that architecture, being sort of part of that buffer, if you will, against the NATO countries. And as NATO has expanded eastward, that has been destabilizing, even provocative to the Russian point of view, to Putin's point of view, in terms of being able to, he's seen that eastward expansion of Russian influence, and countries that look to the West, like Ukraine increasingly has, as destabilizing and threatening to his interests.
Well, let me ask you this, because NATO's membership obviously has grown. There's been talk on again, off and again, about Ukraine becoming a part of that. Why hasn't Ukraine joined NATO?
In a nutshell, it's because that would be seen as provocative. I remember that President George W. Bush made a comment about that being, a possibility. It both put the hope in the minds of the Ukrainians, and then it didn't happen. But it also was seen as a provocative, comment, and as destabilizing and threatening to Russia.
Okay. Well, and talking so much about Ukraine, obviously, as we are, it would be good to put up, we've got photos of both leaders of Russia and Ukraine. We've heard a lot about and from Putin, but we haven't really heard as much, obviously, about the leader of Ukraine. As we take a look at these photos, Jody, tell us maybe what we haven't heard about Putin that we need to know, and what's important for us going forward to know about Ukraine's leader.
I feel like Putin has been in the news a lot, and so what's not been said. Well, one thing that some analysts have been looking at is thinking about why now? Is there something specific to this particular moment that would be have given Putin the idea that this was a good time or an opportune time to attack Ukraine. And some have looked at the fact, I think he's almost 70. He's been in power a while and maybe closer to the end of his political career than not. And so there's some talk about those pieces being potentially making him think that this is an opportune moment. He might be looking at the pandemic as potentially an opportunity, things that might be destabilizing and taking our eye off the ball in terms of Russian aggression. The end of the Trump era, because President Trump was friendlier to Putin, was in fact openly questioning of the use of NATO and its role in the world, and even the role of some of our European allies. President Biden's here. It's not the same. It's not the same situation, and I think that could also be something that might be seen as an opportune time to try to prevent the further looking to the West and moving into the orbit of the West on the part of a country like Ukraine.
Okay. Thank you.
You wanted to know about Zelensky. Hopefully people have heard his story because it's kind of an interesting one.
Yes.
He was a civilian actor, comedian actor, and was actually on. This is, you can script this, but he was in a show that he played a high school teacher who suddenly becomes president, and so when that show finished its season, he actually put his hat in the ring to run. And so he's trying to consolidate democracy in a fragile country, and he's been openly courting the West, talking about wanting to be closer to and even part of the European Union, wanting to bring the Ukraine potentially into NATO. So these are other things that would be seen by a Putin as something provocative and maybe something that from the Russian point of view needed to be curtailed.
Wow. Okay, thank you for all of that. Dr. Christopher Yah joins us from Washington, D.C., Jody. So we're going to bring him into the conversation now. Welcome again, Dr. Yah, and thank you so much for taking the time to be here. So what I'd like to do is, especially for our viewers who may have heard of you but don't know you as well as maybe somebody on campus like Jody, what's important to know about you, sir, before we begin this interview?
Thanks, Kathy. Appreciate you having me on the show today. Well, the National Strategic Research Institute is a research center that works to ensure the United States' safety and preparedness against an increasing array of very sophisticated threats. It was created in 2012 as a partnership between the Department of Defense and the University of Nebraska. It was designated by the Department of Defense as a university-affiliated research center, a UARC. It's a very prestigious credential, and it allows us to act as a trusted partner to the United States government. There are 14 UARCs in the United States. NSRI is sponsored by U.S. Strategic Command, which is the DoD combatant command that deters strategic attack and employs nuclear-capable and global strike forces as directed to guarantee the security of our nation and of our allies. So we have a very particular research focus on strategic deterrence. That's STRATCOM's #1 mission.
Okay, and we're going to get into that in just a little bit here. Jody did a very nice job leading us up to the time of the invasion, right? Christopher, it doesn't seem to really be going as well as Putin may have hoped. What's your take on that?
Right. Well, Karl von Clausewitz, back in the 19th century, I think, discussed this well in his book on war. He's talked about the fog of war, and we use that phrase often when we talk about conflict ourselves. Conflict tends to have a mind of its own at a certain point, with decisions being taken and outcomes happening that that are not always anticipated, and certainly third-order effects can come to the fore unexpectedly. So it's right now we don't know how the war is going with respect to Mr. Putin's expectations, but it doesn't look to be going so well right now. Nonetheless, there's a lot of degradation that the Russian forces are making upon Ukrainian forces. It's tragic, the loss of life across the board in Ukraine. So, one of the biggest questions I think we have is what's Putin's risk calculus right now? What is he looking to achieve? What are the benefits he's looking to gain? And how does he weigh the risks against those benefits? What are the off-ramps that might be suggested? How might this end? If things end up continuing to go poorly for him, does he become more risk acceptant and find himself further boxed into a corner? That could be potentially a bad scenario where he might consider escalating across the nuclear threshold even. We designed, developed, and executed a war game for the United States government back in late 2019 called the Limited Nuclear Conflict War Game. And it had a very eerily similar scenario in the buildup to that nuclear employment war game. That's something obviously that everybody is energized on.
So Christopher, and you mentioned a lot of questions there that people are asking. I'm going to throw another one out based on what you've shared. What is America and its Western allies? What are we doing, and what should we be doing? In other words, what action is being taken now, and in your opinion, from where you sit, should anything be done differently right now at this point?
Right, it's a great question. Really, the West has done probably something that Putin maybe didn't expect and certainly wouldn't welcome. There's really been a quantum leap in the NATO alliance's cohesion. And that, more than anything, I think has to figure negatively into Putin's thinking. That continued unity, the imposition of strategic sanctions, the continued transfer of weapons to Ukraine, the continued halting of Nord Stream 2, all of these actions and more will be debilitating to Russia in the long term. It is important right now to stress that strategic deterrence remains firm. STRATCOM operates forces every day, ICBMs, bombers, strategic submarines, all arrayed to impress upon our adversaries the folly of strategically attacking the United States or our allies, and all arrayed to impose overwhelming and unimaginable costs should they do so.
Talk specifically about the B-52 patrols over NATO allies.
Right. The B-52 is a venerable bomber. It's been around for a very long time, many decades. Will continue to serve for many decades. It's a heavy bomber with global reach. It is capable of launching both conventional and nuclear munitions, cruise missiles especially. And it serves as a very visible demonstration when flown over U.S. or allied or nearby oceanic territory. And it sent an unmistakable signal to both Putin and to the allies. To Putin, underscoring that the integrity and security of the NATO alliance is sacrosanct, and we will do everything in our power to defend NATO. And for the allies, likewise, it reassures them that the full force of the United States is behind them to defend them in the face of an aggressive revisionist power like Russia right now. It kind of goes back to, I'll summarize something that Herman Kahn said back in the Cold War: the best way to look credible is to be credible. And those B-52 bomber patrols are a visible demonstration of very credible power.
There is fear of nuclear engagement, no question about that. And then you talk about a leader like Putin feeling backed up into a corner right? It's kind of scary when you stop to think about how reactive people can be, especially in that kind of a situation. Talk to our viewers a little bit, Christopher, about what the likelihood, in your opinion, is that we would bring that nuclear engagement into play here.
Yeah, it's a frightening scenario, and certainly, first of all, there's the elevated alert posture that he announced maybe a few days ago. That really probably is more like a defensive crouch. It's making sure vulnerabilities in nuclear command and control are tightened, so that they are ready to go if needed. So I wouldn't overreact too much to that elevated alert. But war is unpredictable, as we just said, and the Russians have for a couple decades been determinedly pursuing a theater nuclear force, which is capable of acting in this kind of a scenario. They are very low yield, ultra low yield nuclear weapons. They're still very, very, very destructive, tens or hundreds of tons rather than kilotons. So maybe a couple would take out an air base as opposed to requiring maybe 50 air-launched cruise missiles or other kind of cruise missiles. So they are fearsome weapons, and the Russians train with them, and they have plans to use them. So if you couple that unpredictability of war together with this planned employment of theater nuclear weapons by Putin, the possibility exists. And the possibility, I would say, while it remains low, anything above exceedingly low, exceedingly unlikely, is uncomfortably high when it comes to these kind of fearsome weapons.
All right, so at this point then, at this juncture, what should the U.S. Be doing, knowing that those weapons exist, knowing kind of Putin's position right now, the uncertainty moving forward of war? What is the best thing for all involved for the U.S. to be thinking about right now?
Well, I think one of the lessons we have to take from this is that only unambiguous strength is sufficient to deter the likes of a Putin. And for that matter, a President Xi of China. These are revisionist leaders. I think that it means that the United States needs to rethink whether we need additional countervailing capabilities within the Biden administration's nuclear posture review. We started that in the 2018 nuclear posture review and adjusted the nuclear posture with some modest augmentations, but maybe we need more, and I think we need to consider that. I think there's been talk about considering a no first use declaratory policy or a sole use declaratory policy. I think any change to our nuclear declaratory policy at this point will only make our allies nervous and only embolden our adversaries. And of course, even as we're considering potentially additional measures, nuclear measures, we may have to take, the triad has to be modernized. There's an ongoing discussion, and I think the discussion needs to be finally and fully set aside. There's no time to waste on triad modernization. The full triad has to be modernized, but we should see that more as the floor rather than the ceiling.
Okay, so we have 2 minutes left, Christopher. As you sit around the table with your colleagues, right, and you're thinking, if only. In other words, how could this be resolved if we were living in an ideal world, which obviously we are not. But as you talk with your colleagues, if there were that one or two things that could be done to really bring this to more of a resolve, what would it be?
Well, unfortunately, a lot of the resolution will depend on Mr. Putin. The enemy gets a vote. But his calculus is dynamic, and we need to try to change that calculus through the continued imposition of cost beyond his pain threshold to the point where he will stop this unwise and illegal invasion. I think we need to come out with a strong nuclear posture review. We need to continue things like the B-52 patrols to deter him and to assure our allies. And we need to strengthen the NATO Eastern eastern border formidably, I think. And only that will assure our allies and deter the likes of Putin.
Okay, talking about the Ukraine invasion today with Dr. Jody Nethery-Castro and Dr. Christopher Ya. We have about a minute remaining, and I really want to turn this over to Jody now, who's been listening. 30 seconds, final thoughts on this topic.
Yeah, well, I think I like what Chris said about the uncertainty and sort of the fog of war. I think what I plan to observe kind of going forward is carefulness on the part of the United States, and because things have, war is uncertain. There are ways of things happening that are accidents that can escalate things. And so I think you asked earlier about Ukraine being part of NATO. I mean, there will not be signaling that Ukraine will be part of NATO, because that would be a direct provocation. I think we continue to try to create exit ramps for, as you mentioned, for Putin, in order to bring this to a close in a way that minimizes damage and threat.
Thank you very much, Jody, and of course to Dr. Ya for joining us. I so appreciate that. As we close, a look at Jocelyn Castle as seen through the lens of Austin Ulmer, a junior at UNO. Thank you all for watching. We'll see you next week.
Consider This is an issues and information program produced by UNO Television. More information and program archives can be found at nebraskapublicmedia.org/considerthis. If you'd like to share your comments about this program, call UNO Television at 402-554-2516 during regular business hours, or send an email to cwyatt@unomaha.edu.
There's a unique educational experience right here in Omaha. With access to top-rated programs, in-demand degrees, and a worldwide community of graduates, UNO prepares students for life, wherever it may lead. From Omaha to Italy to Uganda to Japan, Mavericks are working in communities around the globe. So where will a degree from UNO take you? UNO, access to exceptional, access to the world. Learn more at unomaha.edu.
Coming up in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Faded press to a full.
It is the longest-running Omaha-based statewide television program on the air today. Hi everyone, I'm Kathy Wyatt, producer and host of Consider This. Now in our 25th season, we wish to acknowledge those who have made this educational journey possible. Our guests, underwriters, student crews, the Knowledge Network, the University of Nebraska at Omaha, and of course, viewers just like you. Thank you for watching.